Yud Mishnah base. This Mishnah discusses a concept that we first met in the very, very first Mishnah of Mesechah Shabbos. To remind ourselves, in order to be chayav for Hotzah on Shabbos, a person has to do an akira in the Rishus HaYochid, i.e. he's got to lift the item up in the Rishus HaYochid, and then transport it and put it in the Rishus HaRabim, do Hanoch in the Rishus HaRabim, or vice versa, an akira in the Rishus HaRabim, and transfer it and place it and do a Hanoch in the Rishus HaYochid. In order to be chayav a chatos, if you did this b'shogeg on Shabbos, and if you did it b'mezid, then it'd be chayav misa. Without edim or hasra, then it'd be chayav koris. But certainly to be over the deraisa, he has to do the akira and the hanocha from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah or vice versa. Now, our Mishnah is going to tell us that if he transfers an item from a Rosh Hashanah into a Carmelis, not into Rosh Hashanah, into Rosh Hashanah, he's going to move it from a Rosh Hashanah into a Carmelis, not into Rosh Hashanah, then he will in fact be potter. It will not be mutter, it will be potter min haTorah. That means he's exempt. He has not been over a deraisa, but he would be chayev a derabon, and the rabbis still say you shouldn't do that. Now, what is a Carmelis? A Carmelis is neither Rosh Hashanah nor Rosh Hashanah. The Carmelis in our Mishnah is going to be a step, a little ledge at the outside of a house, sort of at the threshold of a house, which has the dimensions which are neither Rosh Hashanah nor Rosh Hashanah. So the Mishnah in question is going to discuss an askupas, a ledge, this threshold, which is 4 by 4 tvachim, but it's not yud tvachim, it's not 10 tvachim high. Were it 10 tvachim high, then it would have the status of a Rosh Hashanah. It is rather 4 by 4 tvachim, and somewhere between 3 and 9 tvachim, which means that it's got a din of a Carmelis. So the Mishnah says as follows: Hamoitzi oichlin, if someone carries food, unasonon al ha'askupa, and he places them from his house, he does the akira in the Rosh Hashanah, and then he moves them and he places them on the iskupa, which is this ledge, this step outside of his house, which has the status of a Carmelis. Bein shechozo v'hitzion, whether or not he himself takes them subsequently from this step, this iskupa, and he moves them afterwards to the Rosh Hashanah, or bein shehitzio acher, whether someone else does that and moves it from this iskupa, from this step, this Carmelis, to the Rosh Hashanah, potter. Then his potter, he has not been over the deraisa, because as mentioned, in order to be over the deraisa, he would have had to have gone straight from the Rosh Hashanah straight out to the Rosh Hashanah, but by placing it down on this Carmelis in the meantime, therefore his potter. Why? He didn't do the melacha in one go. Had he moved it from the Rosh Hashanah to the Rosh Hashanah, then it'd be chayav. But since he placed it on the Carmelis in between, therefore he has broken up the sort of the transfer, and therefore he is potter. Midrabanan, of course, he should not do it. Says the Mishnah, kupa shehimalea peris. A kupa is a basket, a box, shehimalea peris, which is full of fruit. Unasona al ha'iskupa hachitzoina, and he places it on an iskupa hachitzoina. Now this is a bit confusing, because now the Mishnah is actually changing the dimensions of this iskupa, and now we're talking about an iskupa, a step, which is actually lower than 3 tefachim. What we've been talking about till now was an iskupa which had the status of a Carmelis, because it was between 3 and 9 tefachim. Now we're talking about an iskupa in this second half of the Mishnah, which is lower than 3 tefachim. So it's a very low step, which is out, just sort of abutting, just on the outside of the Rosh Hashanah, but it's actually in a Rosh Hashanah, and therefore, since it is lower than 3 tefachim, it actually takes on the status of the Rosh Hashanah itself. So imagine you've got the person's house, and outside of his house he's got a tiny step, a very low step, a few inches high, which is in the Rosh Hashanah. That step has already got the status of Rosh Hashanah because it's lower than 3 tefachim. Imagine a little stone, a pebble in a Rosh Hashanah that doesn't get its status of Rosh Hashanah or a Carmelis just because it's not part of the road or something. It becomes bottled to the Rosh Hashanah. It's got to stay as part of the Rosh Hashanah, and therefore this little step is part of the Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, if a person carries a kupa, malea peris, a box full of peris from his own Rosh Hashanah, from his own house, and he places it on this iskupa hachitzona, which is basically the Rosh Hashanah, In ordinary circumstances, he'd be chayiv, because he's transferred from the Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. But over here, the guy doesn't transfer the entire box. He only transfers, let's say, 2/3 of the box. Af al pi sheroiv haperis bachutz. Even though the majority of the fruit are outside, potter ad sheyotzi es kol hakupa. Until he actually transfers the entire kupa, the entire box, from inside his Rosh Hashanah to this iskupa, which has got a din of a Rosh Hashanah, until he does that, he is only going to be potter, he is not going to be chayiv min haTorah, but of course he'll be also midrabanan. Now, the problem with this is, which is the problem which the Gemara raises, but surely when he carries the box from his Rosh Hashanah and places 2/3 of this box on this iskupa, which is in the Rosh Hashanah, true, the whole box is not outside, and you're not going to be chayiv for carrying the box itself, but surely the fruit inside the box, there are going to be whole fruits which are outside in the Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, surely I've made a hotzah from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah for those fruits which are in the part of the Rosh Hashanah of that part of the box which are outside. So the Gemara has got two answers to address this problem. One answer is the view of Chizkiah. And Chizkiah says that the box contains long vegetables like cucumbers, not the small ones, they're straw, but the long cucumbers, or gourds, or very long vegetables. And imagine if you've got a box. Take this art scroll siddur. Imagine if it was like a box, and you place the vegetables all the way along, the long cucumbers all the way along. And then you take this box and you transfer it and you put 2/3 of the box outside into the Rosh Hashanah. The majority of the box is outside, and the majority of each cucumber is also outside. But no one single cucumber is actually outside. And therefore you're potter for making this transfer, because you have not transferred either the entire box or not even a single vegetable from inside to outside. Because we're talking about cucumbers, and therefore, or long vegetables, where the majority is outside, but the minority still remains inside. So there is not one single cucumber or vegetable which happens to be outside. That's Chizkiah's answer. The Gemara, however, gives a second answer. The name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan introduces us to the principle of Eged Kli Shmei Eged, which means, according to the Rambam's understanding of this principle, the principle is that all the items in the box are actually sort of unified as to sort of one composite item. So even if the box contains smaller items, apples, tomatoes, or for example nuts or something like that, even though if a guy carries the box and he places the majority of the box outside, and there are lots of fruit which are wholly outside into the Rosh Hashanah, he is still potter. Why? Because of this principle. The principle is Eged Kli Shmei Eged. It sort of unifies it as to one composite item, and therefore you look at the box as a whole. And since the box of a whole is not completely outside, but only 2/3 outside, therefore he has not done a Ma'aser Hotzah going from a Rosh Hashanah into a Rosh Hashanah. And therefore the Mishnah concludes, Af al pi sheroiv haperis bachutz, potter, he is potter ad sheyotzi es kol hakupa, until he takes out the entire kupa. That is the end of Perek Yud Mishnah Beis.